Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Clare, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Dave Smallwood. Dave is a Principal Team Teach trainer and Company Director of SENse Training and Consultancy. He's worked in special schools for both the local authority and for the National Autistic Society. As a staff development coordinator for the National Autistic Society, he's also delivered and developed training in autism, equality, diversity and rights. Dave is also an occasional co-host of the Team Teach podcast. And today, Dave and I are talking about having a consistent approach to behaviour in our services. Enjoy the episode. Hi Dave, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Claire. How are you?
I'm very well. We are doing a topic around consistency today. So we're doing a topic around creating a consistent approach to behaviour in our services. Quite a juicy topic, but start us off with a quick intro to yourself.
I am Dave. I'm a principal trainer for Team Teach, delivering the range of Team Teach packages. My experience is working in education, predominantly with young people that have a formal diagnosis of autism. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. And my name's Clare Edmondson. I'm also a principal tutor for Team Teach. My background's quite varied. I've worked in lots of different services. I started off working in education, then I worked in mental health services and adoption and fostering agencies. And then I've gone back into education, working in autistic provisions and pupil referral units and alternative provisions. So we have a good bit of experience between us to talk about consistency in teams. Let's start off with our reflective question. What do you wish that you knew then that you know now about the topic, David?
Well, it's what it says on the tin. Team Teach. Teaching as part of a team, and that's it. It's all working together for the best interests of the children. We have behaviour policies in place that we follow. That's like our instruction manual, isn't it? But actually we need to delve a little bit deeper if we're having issues with behaviours. And we can't just rely on one person in a service to do that. It has to be a team approach. It has to be everybody having an input in that. I hear quite a lot saying schools, head of inclusion or SENCOs are the people that write the plans for certain individuals. But it shouldn't be that. It should be formulated by everybody, and then everybody should follow that plan. And it's working together as a team, basically, and communicating effectively with each other.
Yeah, I think really reflectively for me, it's interesting that you said that, because I do think when I first started working in all of the services that I worked at early on in my career, I think I more so worked as an individual and kind of cared most about what was happening within the realms of my control. And I think that it wasn't until I became more experienced that I realized really what you were saying is the most important thing, that we actually have to be quite joined up in that care and consistency and approach, because otherwise, I'm not suggesting that I was some sort of maverick. I actually wasn't like that at all, which might surprise Dave, but I wasn't. I was doing the best I could for the individuals in my care. But I did lack, I think, the ability and the sight, I guess, that I have now to be able to be more joined up with the team around me. And really to be truly person-centered in our approach, we do need to have that team around individuals. It isn't up to me, it isn't up to you. It is about us together collaborating and consistently working together to create those changes. And I definitely wasn't aware of that early on. It took a while to kind of click that it's all of us together. If you work with parents and carers, our family engagement training equips you with the skills, knowledge and understanding to build positive relationships. Help your families understand and support their child's behaviour, recognise the challenges and opportunities in your organisation, and receive an exclusive range of resources you can use to practically support your families. Take a look at this exciting training option on the Team Teach website.
We do find it though, don't we, Claire? Well, I'm speaking for you here, but something happens with behaviour. Okay, we'll call upon, say, the behaviour mentors. They'll fix it. Like it's an oil leak in a car, and we can just like fix it, and then it's all right. It's not. And in Team Teach, we talk about values-driven approaches, and that's values-driven approach from all of us, and that's the crux of it. That's the basic of everything. But we do rely on individuals sometimes. I use an analogy quite a lot, is why have we got children in a river and we do everything we can to save them and pluck them out? Well, why are we not at the other end stopping them from falling in the first place? And that for me is someone has a behavioural issue in class, they get sent to inclusion department will fix it and then send them back to class. But if we're not following the same approaches and not being consistent in our approaches, the same thing's going to happen again, and it keeps happening, and children are falling in the river constantly. And we can stop that by having consistent plans in place. For certain individuals, I mean, we have behavior policies that fit most people, of course we do, but there's that tiny percentage in a setting where it's not going to, and we're going to have to follow some kind of plan. And I've had it before with education and healthcare plans, like, well, teachers haven't got time to read that. Well, yes they have, because teaching standards would say they have. It's a statutory document that should underpin our practice. Or no, that's not the word. What's the word?
Dictate
our approaches. But some of them are huge. So what we do is we gather that information as a team. We get knowledge and have experiences of young people, and then we compact that into a smaller document that's a working document that we can follow as part of a plan. And then that stops the need from having to have other people pick up the pieces and just put them back in that same position. So we stop them from falling in the river rather than rescue them and pop them back to the other end where they're going to fall in again.
I think it's really interesting thinking about that consistency. So what you're talking about there is having a unified approach, I suppose, from a team to try and, understand the need, understand what behavior is communicating, and writing appropriate plans that people stick to. But I'm just wondering if you have this. So whenever I deliver a Team Teach course, so whether I'm training adult services, working in caring services, whether it's mental health services, schools, I would say whenever I do a module called Behaviours That Challenge, staff identify that one of the things that is not going so well in service, or that can be a challenge, is that staff are inconsistent. And I think literally every single Team Teach course I've ever delivered, that comes up as a challenge. But I'm just wondering if it is feasible that we can have some sort of consistent approach, because it's there in every single training course that it's a problem. But the fixes that we come up with, such as, we do our Team Teach courses, but people are suggesting that inconsistency is a challenge, but then a school perhaps can only afford to have X amount of people trained in the Team Teach method, and not, ideally we would do whole school, but sometimes budgets aren't going to let us train a whole school in a whole method. But yeah, I'm just wondering about that. That's just something that sprung to mind.
It's a really difficult question to answer, isn't it? Because I joke on courses quite a lot when I've got sports coaches on, because they're often the most popular members of staff in school. The children love them.
Yeah.
Why? Because of their approach and the way they do things. So I don't know if we can be wholly consistent with each other. We're not robots. We're not going to approach every situation exactly the same as everyone else. But the plans that we formulate are guidelines, really, things that are going to help us. Of course, we can have our own personalities within that. but it gives us something to work from. Like we know the young people's interests and how best to distract them if we need to distract them. All those things would be in there as proactive strategies into a plan. But we also have to have our own personalities in there as well. The issue I have a little bit is with that consistency is when I'm not consistent. I need to be consistent in my approach. If I laugh at something today and let it go, and then tomorrow I shout at them for doing something wrong for the same thing, then I'm not being consistent in my approach. So the day after, that young person doesn't know which Dave they're getting today. So that makes them feel emotionally unsafe. And are they going to learn when they feel emotionally unsafe? Probably not. So it's not necessarily that everybody has to be the same personality as me and follow all exactly the same strategies as I do. But I need to be consistent. And if there's some kind of emotions driving my own behavior, I need to be aware of that. I need to be able to address that myself, so that I can be consistent.
I think that's so important, bringing yourself to the behavior policy, but yeah, bringing your own unique personality. Because then I'm wondering if consistency can go too far, where we do have some services where perhaps the implementation of behavior policies and behavior approaches are so rigid that then staff are consistently thinking other staff are being inconsistent because it's almost unachievable to be able to implement the policy because it's so rigid. Does that make sense? Where it's like consistency gone too far, it's so uniformed that it's actually quite hard to implement and to be completely consistent.
Yeah, it is really difficult. Um, that's behavior policies for me. It, we go into a setting and read the behavior policy and we think that's it. That's us being consistent with behavior. It isn't. It's a guideline. Um, and we need to feel empowered on making reasonable adjustments in certain situations. What is it they say? Consistently inconsistent.
Yeah. So everyone understands that there will be times where it will be inconsistent, which actually should be a read as meeting needs. And
Yeah,
that's where we will be flexible.
we will, but we don't want to go to the other extreme where it's like we just throw the behavior policy out the window. I'm not following that because then we're going to have chaos. So we do.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, most of the time, if you've got a school policy in place, then you follow the school policy. That's our instructions. Always being mindful though that there might be other things driving certain behaviors.
Mhm.
We did a podcast a while ago on uniform, and it might be that the behavior policy states if you haven't got your tie on, then something happens, you get a C1 or something. But maybe on the way to school this morning, someone grabbed a tie and threw it down a drain. But
Mhm.
now we're using the behavior policy and ignoring the actual facts that are in place. So we need to be mindful and empathetic when implementing behavior policies sometimes. Having those little conversations, eking out a little bit of information, and have a conversation about it. Okay, well, all right, you've told me why you've not got your tie on. I understand. On this occasion, we are going to have to follow the behavior policy. Um, but yeah, it's a difficult one.
I think it's how, yeah, you're talking about is it's actually how we implement that behavior policy, and going back to really the team teach courses is it is a values based approach, isn't it? And the explanation of why we're doing certain things can be really helpful to keep people consistent. I think as well, I know that lots of schools and different services, caring services, mental health, now do actually use a values based approach as part of their behaviour policies, really to make it simpler. And there might just be kind of three key values that feed into the behaviour policy. So, an example of this might be in the service I work in, which is an autism provision, where we actually talk about safety quite a lot. and we create quite a consistent team, really, because when we are talking about behaviour, if it's about safety, we remind the individual that, you know, this is unsafe, we're safe in this service, and it really comes back to that point, and that's done consistently. So if that's just one person using that safe kind of line, it just doesn't have the impact. But if we're consistently linking things back to the why, to our values, then I think that really helps to create that approach. And it's broad enough that you can bring your own personality, and it's not necessarily just about consequences and aspects like that. It's actually bringing it back to a core human value. And I think that helps to create consistency, because it is general enough that everyone can bring their own flavor to it, if you like. But you've got the keywords in there. But if you've got something that's so blooming complicated and tricky and actually doesn't make much sense, then I think it's much harder to create that consistency.
Yeah, yeah. No one knows where they're up to. um, and it's funny you just said the why. Then I was thinking it as you were saying it, and that is so important. If we just follow behavior policies blindly, then what's the reason for it? Why have we got this policy in place? Why are we doing this? And that's a good question. I suppose it's one of my top tips for later. I'll just throw it in now.
Oh.
Ask yourself the question, why? Yeah, the behavior policy says this, so this has to happen. Okay, but why? And then we'll become more empathetic and more likely to have a conversation about it. If we're just robotically throwing out consequences and not thinking about the reasons why ourselves, then the young people are never going to know that answer. And then all they're ever going to be is being punished, and there's going to be no explanation anywhere along the line.
Yeah, they've got to know the why, and it's in the Ofsted framework as well about preparing individuals really for later life, if we're talking about school and things. So even in our behavior policy, if we're linking it back to the why and to future life, I think that's really important for life skills, no matter what service we work in. I'm getting a bit conscious of time, Dave. I think we're actually running to time, so I'm quite
Oh, are
excited by
we?
that. I
That's
know
good.
we are actually running to time, and I won't have to do some, I don't know, difficult editing. So
And
if
I've already given a top tip.
you've already given one top tip, could you just say that again, just so for my own consistency and order of the podcast that it's right at the end?
Yes. um, the why. Ask yourself the question, why? That's my top tip. We do have to follow behavior policies, of course. So, but when you are, and when you're implementing a certain consequence for an action, then always ask yourself the question, why? Why am I doing this? Why is this policy in place? What value is this driven from? And then we can have that little bit more empathy with the young people, explain to them the why.
Mhm.
And then we're going some way towards helping them and supporting them and managing that behavior rather than just punishing them, and not giving any explanation why.
Great, Dave. And then my top tip is around planning. So Dave talked earlier on the podcast about having individual plans for those children that might need individual plans around behaviour. And then obviously you've got your whole school policies and kind of behaviour plans. But I just wanted to think quite carefully about the individual plans that we might have for people in our service, that we just need to consistently implement that plan. It needs to be regularly updated. If we're using plans that are about 100 pages in length, let's create a top sheet that just has some of the core points that we just, you know, the non-negotiables that we really need to focus on. And that creates consistency where we're not trying to broadly tackle everything. We might be zoning down on a few different areas, and that can create consistency in our teams. And that focus is super important, I think, to help with consistency. And then, should I do the third top tip, Dave?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking quite practically, which my brain sometimes goes to, about making sure that we've got time for planning to create consistency, that we have time to do debriefs, that we're looking over data of incidences that have happened. And so the more knowledge that we have of the individuals that we support, the more consistent we can be in approach, because we're actually finding out the why. So Dave's mentioned that in the sense of why we implement things, but actually the why someone is demonstrating those challenges or concerning behaviours. So it's really important that we have the time to plan in our teams, in our meetings, so we can share information, hand over, and actually come up with some ideas about how we can consistently work with that individual.
Yeah, so important. Time's one of those difficult things, isn't it, that no one's ever got enough of. And that's always the thing that gets in the way. Maybe, Claire, we should have a podcast on time.
What, where we actually fit within the timeline we're meant to?
Yes, yes.
Well, I can actually make that wish come true, because I think we've done it in this one. So yeah, yes. But Dave, that's been a really interesting one. Hopefully there's been some nice tips for everyone there, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, brilliant, Claire. Thank you. Bye.
You've been listening to the Team Teach podcast. It's been great to have you here with us as we discuss behaviour, communication, and the ways we can best support those in our care. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.